They called her just the roof attachment, a spare part. The Marine nobody noticed until she was the only thing standing between 12 good men and a flag-draped casket. But that part comes later. First, you need to understand what it means to be invisible in a place where everyone is watching. 3 weeks before the ambush that would change everything, Lance Corporal Tinley Okonkwo climbed the rusted ladder to her position atop the guard tower at Forward Operating Base Griffin. The sun had barely crested the mountains of Helmand Province, but the heat was already pressing down like a hand on her chest. She carried her M40A5 rifle across her back, a spotting scope in her cargo pocket, and the weight of being forgotten in her bones. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you know someone who served in a role that never got the recognition it deserved. Maybe you have been that person yourself. The tower was nothing special. Plywood walls, sandbag reinforcement, a narrow slit for observation that faced the valley where the enemy liked to move at night. Tinley had memorized every rock formation, every goat path, every shadow that shifted wrong when someone was trying to hide. She had been up here for 9 months. 9 months of 12-hour shifts. 9 months of watching while everyone else kicked indoors and came back with stories. Down below, she could hear the squad gathering for morning briefing. Sergeant Colt Drennan's voice carried up through the still air, confident and commanding. He was running through the day's patrol route, assigning positions, checking equipment. She waited for her name, waited for him to acknowledge that Overwatch existed. He never did. Corporal Yusuf Hadid's voice cut in. "Hey, Sergeant, what about Okonkwo?" A pause. Then Drennan's response, almost annoyed. "Right. Roof's on the roof. Same as always." Laughter from someone. Probably Wick. Lance Corporal Jerome Wickham found everything funny, especially things that were not. Tinley adjusted her scope and said nothing. She had learned that silence was easier than fighting for space in conversations where she was not wanted. Her father had taught her that. He had also taught her that the person nobody sees is often the person who sees everything. She pulled the worn photograph from her breast pocket. Staff Sergeant Emeka Okonkwo, her father, standing in front of a different guard tower in a different desert. Fallujah, 2004. He was smiling in the picture, but she knew what came after. The ambush, the Overwatch position, the 12 Marines he saved before the bullet found him. They gave him a silver star and a folded flag. They forgot his name within a year. She would not let them forget hers. The morning passed in increments of heat and vigilance. At 0847, she spotted a man on a motorcycle taking photographs of the base's northern perimeter. She radioed it in. Drennan said copy and did nothing. At 10:23, she noticed a pattern in the foot traffic near the village market. Too many young men walking the same route. Too many glances toward the road the patrol would take tomorrow. She noted it in her journal, a small leather book filled with observations nobody asked for. At 11:56, Private First Class Danny Castellanos climbed the ladder with her lunch. MRE, beef stew, which was marginally better than the veggie omelet nobody would eat. The kid was 19, fresh from infantry training, and so homesick it practically radiated off him like heat. He set the MRE down and lingered, looking out at the valley like it might transform into something familiar if he stared long enough. "You doing okay, Castellanos?" He startled, surprised she knew his name. "Yes, Lance Corporal. Just, getting used to it." She nodded. "Takes time. The quiet is the hardest part at first. Then it becomes the part you need." He looked at her rifle, at the scope, at the journal beside her knee. "Do you ever see anything up here? Like anything real?" "Every day," she said. "The question is whether anyone listens when I tell them about it." Castellanos did not know what to say to that. He climbed back down the ladder, and Tinley returned to her watch. Below, she could hear Wick making another joke about the roof attachment, about how boring it must be, about how he would lose his mind up there with nothing to do. She smiled just slightly. Let them think that. Let them believe Overwatch was just staring at sand. She had 17 confirmed kills in her journal that nobody knew about. 17 times she had seen the threat before anyone else and removed it before it could touch her Marines. 17 times she had saved lives from a position everyone considered useless. But there was something else in that journal now, a pattern she could not quite piece together. Enemy movement that was too coordinated. Observation of the base that was too systematic. Something was coming. She could feel it the way her father must have felt it in Fallujah in the hours before everything went wrong. She tried to warn Drennan that evening, catching him outside the command post. "Sergeant, I have been tracking movement in the valley. There's a pattern forming. I think they're planning something." Drennan barely looked up from his tablet. "Roof, I appreciate the initiative, but we have intel sources for that. Actualmente. Just keep doing your job and let the people with clearance worry about the big picture." He walked away before she could respond. Tinley climbed back to her tower as the sun bled red across the mountains. She pressed her hand against her father's scope, mounted on her rifle where his hands had once rested. She made him a promise that night, the same promise she made every night. "I see them, Dad, even if nobody sees me." The wind carried dust across the valley, and somewhere in the darkness, the enemy was watching too. They were planning, preparing, counting on the fact that nobody paid attention to the roof attachment. They had no idea what she was capable of. None of them did. The next morning came with a dust storm that turned the sky the color of dried blood. Tinley was on the roof before dawn, watching the valley disappear behind curtains of swirling sand. Most Marines hated the storms. She welcomed them. The enemy moved differently when they thought no one could see. She spotted them at 0712. 3 figures moving along the northern goat path, carrying something heavy between them. The sand obscured details, but she had watched this terrain long enough to know what did not belong. She tracked them through her scope until they stopped near a culvert that crossed the main supply route. The route the morning patrol would take in less than 2 hours. Overwatch to command, she radioed. "I have eyes on 3 military-age males at grid reference for Savannah. They're digging near the MSR culvert. Possible IED emplacement. Static." Then Drennan's voice, irritated. "Roof, visibility is near 0. How are you seeing anything? I know the terrain, Sergeant. The shapes are wrong. Something is there." A long pause. "Then fine. I will reroute the patrol east. But if this is nothing, we are having a conversation about Crying Wolf." The patrol went east. The bomb disposal unit found a pressure plate IED buried in the culvert that afternoon, packed with enough explosive to flip an MRAP. Drennan gathered the squad that evening and told them his instincts had saved their lives. Said he had a feeling about that route. Said experience was worth more than any intelligence report. Tinley listened from the tower, her jaw tight. Hadid climbed up 20 minutes later with 2 bottles of water and a look that said he knew. "That was you," he said. "The IED." She shrugged. "Does it matter?" "It matters to the guys who would have been in that vehicle." Hadid settled against the sandbags, his radio equipment hanging from his vest. He was the only one who ever came up here without being ordered. The only one who looked at her like she was a person instead of a piece of equipment. "Why do you let him take credit?" he asked. "Because the job is not about credit. The job is about them going home." Hadid studied her for a long moment. "You sound like someone who learned that the hard way." The dust storm had faded to a haze, and the stars were beginning to emerge. Tinley pulled out her father's photograph, the edges worn soft from handling. She did not show it to people. But Hadid was different. Hadid saw things too. "My father," she said. "Staff Sergeant Emeka Okonkwo. He was Overwatch in Fallujah. November 2004. His squad got ambushed in a market district, pinned down with no cover and no way out." Hadid waited. He understood that some stories needed space to breathe. He was supposed to stay in his position. That was the protocol. Overwatch does not move. But he saw the flanking element coming, saw that his squad had maybe 30 seconds before they were surrounded. So he moved, drew fire to himself, called out positions until they could extract. She traced her finger across her father's face in the photograph. He took 11 rounds getting them out, kept shooting until the 12th one found his head. They gave him a Silver Star and buried him in Arlington. By the time I enlisted, half the guys in his unit could not remember his name. Just called him the Overwatch guy. The one who died on the roof. Hadid exhaled slowly. So that is why you are up here. I am up here because this is where I can do the most good. And because someone has to remember that the roof is not just an attachment. It is the reason people make it home. They sat in silence as the last light bled from the sky. Somewhere below, Wick was telling the IED story again, adding details that had not happened, making Drennan sound like a psychic. Tinley let it go. She had stopped keeping score a long time ago. After Hadid left, she climbed down from the tower for the first time in 14 hours. Her legs ached, and her eyes burned from staring through the scope. She was heading toward the shower trailer when she heard the sound. Crying, quiet, muffled, coming from behind the generator housing. She found Castellanos there, knees pulled to his chest, shoulders shaking. He tried to hide it when he saw her, wiping his face with his sleeve and straightening up like nothing was wrong. I was just. There was dust in my eyes. Tinley sat down beside him without a word. The generator hummed, providing cover for whatever needed to be said. How long since you talked to your family? She asked. Castellanos stared at the ground. 16 days. The satellite phone is always taken. And when I do get it, I do not know what to say. Everything here is so different. I do not know how to explain it to them. You do not have to explain it. You just have to let them hear your voice. That is what they need. That is what you need too. She reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out a small package. Beef jerky, a pack of cards, a paperback novel, and a phone card she had been saving. She pressed it into his hands. The phone card has 40 minutes on it. Use it tonight before the line gets long. Call your mom. Tell her about the food, the heat, the boredom, the normal stuff. Save the hard stuff for when you are home. Castellanos looked at the package like she had handed him gold. I cannot take this. This is yours. It is mine to give, and I am giving it. Just do me a favor. Anything. When you make it home, and you will make it home, remember that the people who helped you were not always the ones making noise. Sometimes they were the ones nobody noticed at all. He nodded, clutching the package to his chest. She left him there, walking back toward the tower. She had 8 more hours of watch ahead, and her journal was calling. The pattern was still there, still growing, still pointing toward something she could not yet name. The briefing the next morning confirmed her fears. A major operation was being planned. A push into the valley to clear a village that had become an insurgent stronghold. Every available Marine would be on the ground. High risk, high visibility, the kind of mission that made careers and ended lives. Drennan ran through the assignments with the energy of a man who smelled promotion. Wick on point. Hadid on comms. Castellanos in the rear with security. Every role assigned, every contingency planned. Tinley raised her hand. Sergeant, I have been tracking unusual activity near the objective. The patterns suggest they know we are coming. I think this could be a trap. Drennan's expression flickered with annoyance. Roof, intel has cleared the route. We have drone coverage and local assets. I appreciate your concern, but this is above your pay grade. With respect, Sergeant, I have been watching that valley for 9 months. I know how they move. This feels wrong. The room was silent. Wick smirked. Hadid kept his eyes on the floor. Drennan stepped closer, lowering his voice. Lance Corporal, you are the roof attachment. You watch. That is your job. The thinking happens down here, with the people who have the full picture. Are we clear? Crystal, Sergeant. She climbed back to her tower as the squad prepared for the mission that would either make them heroes or ghosts. Her journal was open beside her, filled with lines and arrows and timestamps that told a story nobody wanted to hear. They were walking into something. She could feel it, and when it happened, she would be the only one in position to do anything about it. The morning of the mission arrived with an unnatural stillness. No wind, no distant gunfire. Even the dogs in the village had gone quiet. Tinley noticed these things because noticing was what she did. The silence felt like the held breath before a scream. She had spent the night in her tower, unable to sleep, filling pages of her journal with everything wrong about this operation. The pattern had crystallized into something she could finally name. For 3 weeks, the enemy had been probing their defenses, testing response times, mapping patrol routes. They had watched the base with the same patience she used to watch them. And now, on the eve of a major push into their territory, they had gone silent. That was not retreat. That was preparation. She found Hadid by the vehicle staging area, running final checks on his radio equipment. His face was tight with concentration, but he looked up when she approached. "You look like you have not slept," he said. "I have not. Yusuf, I need you to listen to me. Really listen." He set down his tools. "I am listening." She showed him the journal. Pages of observations, timestamps, grid coordinates, movement patterns. A map she had drawn showing enemy positions over the past 3 weeks, each one circled and dated. "Look at this. They have been watching our northern approach for 18 days straight. They stopped 5 days ago, right when this mission was announced. They know we are coming, and they have moved to positions we cannot see from our current surveillance points." Hadid studied the pages, his expression growing darker. "Have you shown this to Drennan?" "3 times. He says Intel has cleared the route. Intel does not sit on a roof for 9 months watching these people live their lives." Hadid handed back the journal. "I believe you, but I'm just a radio guy. Drennan does not listen to me either. Then help me find someone who will listen." Before Hadid could respond, Wick's voice cut through the morning air. Well. The roof attachment came down from her perch. "What's the matter, Okonkwo? Afraid you might miss the action while you are up there counting rocks?" He swaggered over with 2 other Marines flanking him, all of them geared up and ready for the kind of mission that made for good stories back home. Tenley kept her voice level. "I am trying to make sure you come back alive to tell your stories, Wick." He laughed. "From a tower, half a click away? What are you going to do? Wave at the bad guys? Maybe throw a sandwich at them?" The other Marines chuckled. Tenley felt the heat rise in her chest, but kept it contained. Her father had taught her that anger was a luxury operators could not afford. Anger made you miss things. Anger got people killed. "I will be on Overwatch," she said. "Same as always. When things go wrong, you will be glad someone is watching." Wick stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "Things are not going to go wrong. You know why? Because the guys on the ground actually know what they are doing. We do not need a babysitter on a roof. We need shooters in the dirt. But I guess some people are not cut out for real work." He walked away before she could respond. The other Marines followed, still laughing. Hadid put a hand on her shoulder. "He is scared. They all are. Fear makes people mean. Fear should make people careful." She tucked the journal back in her cargo pocket. "I will be in position before you step off. Whatever happens out there, I will be watching." She found Castellanos behind the supply building, checking his rifle for the 4th time. His hands were steady, but his eyes betrayed him. He was terrified. "First real op?" she asked. He nodded. "They said it would be routine. Clear the village, search for weapons caches, establish a presence. But everyone is acting like it is something else." Tenley crouched beside him. "Listen to me. When you are out there, stay close to Hadid. He knows what he is doing. Keep your head on a swivel and trust your training. Do not try to be a hero. Just do your job and stay alive. What if something goes wrong? Then you find cover and you wait. I will be on the roof. I will be watching everything. If something goes wrong, I will see it before you do. And I will do everything in my power to get you home." Castellanos met her eyes for the first time. "Why do you care? About me, I mean. I am nobody." She thought about her father, about the 12 Marines he saved, about the way nobody remembered his name. "Because nobody is nobody," she said, "and because the people who think they're nobody are usually the ones worth saving." She left him there and made her way to the command post for one final attempt. Staff Sergeant Beaumont Rowe had arrived the previous night for a routine inspection. He was old corps, 3 combat deployments, the kind of Marine who had earned every wrinkle on his face. If anyone would listen, it would be him. She found him reviewing maps with Drennan. Both men looked up when she entered. "Lance Corporal Okonkwo," Drennan said, his voice carrying a warning. "We are in the middle of final briefing." "Staff Sergeant," she said, addressing Rowe directly. "I have intelligence that suggests this operation may be compromised. Request permission to present my findings." Rowe raised an eyebrow. "Intelligence from where?" 9 months of continuous observation from the Overwatch position. I have documented enemy movement patterns that indicate they are expecting us. I believe we are walking into a prepared ambush. Drennan stepped forward. Sir, Lance Corporal Okonkwo is our roof attachment. She provides Overwatch support. She is not trained in intelligence analysis. I'm trained to watch, Tinley said, and I've been watching longer than anyone else on this base. Rose studied her for a long moment. The room was silent. Then he turned to Drennan. How long until step-off? 40 minutes, sir. Rowe nodded slowly. We proceed as planned, but I want drone coverage extended and QRF on standby. He looked at Tinley. I hope you're wrong, Lance Corporal. So do I, sir. She climbed to her tower as the squad assembled below. 12 Marines, loaded for combat, checking weapons and cracking jokes to hide their nerves. She watched them through her scope, memorizing faces, positions, the way they moved. Hadid looked up and gave her a small nod. Castellanos did the same. Drennan never looked up at all. At 0600, the convoy rolled out through the gate. Tinley tracked them until they disappeared into the valley, then shifted her scope to the terrain ahead. The village sat 2 kilometers out, nestled against a ridge that provided perfect positions for ambush. She opened her journal and wrote the time. The silence was deafening. The mountains watched, and somewhere in the shadows, the enemy was watching too. They were all walking into the mouth of something hungry, and she was the only one who could see its teeth. Tinley tracked the convoy through her scope as it wound along the valley floor. The vehicles moved in tactical formation, spaced apart to minimize casualties from a single IED. Textbook approach. Exactly what the enemy would expect. She swept the ridgeline above the village, scanning for anything out of place. A glint of metal, a shadow that moved wrong. The telltale heat shimmer of bodies hiding in the rocks. For 20 minutes, she saw nothing. The valley looked empty. Peaceful even. That was what terrified her. The convoy reached the village outskirts at 0643. She watched the Marines dismount, fanning out into their assigned positions. Drennan directed traffic with hand signals, moving his team toward the first cluster of buildings. Hadid stayed close to the vehicles, setting up the mobile communications array. Castellanos took his position at the rear, rifle up, scanning the rooftops like she had taught him. Good kid, she thought. Stay alert. Stay alive. She shifted her scope to the northern ridge, then the eastern approach, then back to the village. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her gut, that instinct her father had described in his letters home. The feeling that the world was holding its breath. Then she saw it. A flicker of movement on the western ridge. So small she almost missed it. A man repositioning behind a rock formation, adjusting something in his hands. She tracked left and found another. Then another. They were spread across a 200-meter front, hidden in positions that had clearly been prepared days in advance. She counted 11 fighters on the western ridge alone. Her blood turned to ice. She swept to the eastern ridge and found more. 8, maybe 10, dug into fighting positions with overlapping fields of fire. The village was not the objective. The village was the bait. The ridges were the trap. Overwatch to Bravo Actual, she transmitted, keeping her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. I have visual on enemy positions. Multiple fighters on both ridgelines. You are in a kill zone. Say again, you are in a kill zone. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Static. She tried again. Bravo Actual, this is Overwatch. Do you copy? Enemy positions confirmed on western and eastern ridges. Request immediate response. Nothing but the hiss of dead air. They were jamming communications. The enemy had planned this down to the last detail. They had known the Marines were coming. They had prepared the ambush, and now they had cut off any chance of warning. Tinley grabbed her backup radio and tried the emergency frequency. More static. She tried the command post at the FOB. Dead. Every channel, she attempted return the same hollow silence. She was watching her squad walk into a massacre, and she could not say a word. Down in the village, the Marines had begun their sweep. Drennan led a team into the first building, while another team secured the perimeter. They were moving efficiently, professionally, completely unaware of the death waiting above them. Tinley's hands trembled as she worked through her options. She could fire a warning shot, but that would give away her position and might trigger the ambush early. She could try to reach the convoy on foot, but she would never make it in time. She could abandon her position and find a better vantage point, somewhere she might be able to make a difference when everything went wrong. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Overwatch does not move. That is the protocol. But her father had moved. He had broken protocol to save his squad, and it had cost him his life. She looked through her scope at Castellanos, still scanning the rooftops, still trusting that someone was watching over him. She looked at Hadid, working frantically on the communications array, probably realizing by now that something was wrong. She looked at Wick, swagger gone, moving with the careful precision of a man who sensed danger even if he could not name it. 12 Marines. 12 lives. And she was the only one who could see what was coming. The decision made itself. She grabbed her rifle and her pack, leaving behind everything that would slow her down. There was an abandoned compound 300 meters to the east, higher elevation, better sight lines on both ridges. If she could reach it before the ambush started, she might be able to make a difference. She might be able to do what her father did. She might be able to bring them home. Tinley descended the ladder faster than she ever had, her boots barely touching the rungs. She hit the ground running, staying low, using every piece of cover the terrain offered. The compound was visible in the distance, a crumbling structure that had been abandoned years ago. Perfect position, perfect risk. She was 200 meters out when the first shot echoed across the valley. Then the world exploded. The ambush erupted from both ridgelines simultaneously. Automatic weapons fire poured down into the village from a dozen positions. RPGs streaked through the air, one of them striking a vehicle and sending a column of black smoke into the sky. The Marines scattered, diving for cover, returning fire at enemies they could barely see. Tinley dropped behind a rock formation, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Through her scope, she could see the chaos unfolding. Drennan was pinned behind a low wall, shouting orders that no one could hear over the gunfire. Hadid was dragging a wounded Marine toward the remaining vehicle. Castellanos had frozen in the open, paralyzed by the violence erupting around him. "Move," she whispered. "Castellanos, move." A round struck the dirt near his feet, and he finally broke, scrambling toward a doorway as bullets chased him across the street. The enemy had them surrounded, outgunned, outpositioned. The only thing preventing a complete slaughter was the Marines' training and the fact that the enemy had not expected such disciplined return fire. But discipline would only buy them minutes. Without support, without communication, without someone changing the equation, they would all die in that village. Tinley looked at the compound ahead. 100 meters of open ground between her and a position where she could make a difference. 100 meters where she would be completely exposed. She thought of her father, of the 12 Marines he saved, of the bullet that found him when he had nothing left to give. She thought of Castellanos cowering in that doorway, of Hadid bleeding in the dust, of every Marine down there who had never looked up at her tower, who had never known her name, who had called her just a roof attachment. She was going to bring them home. All of them. Tinley took a breath, steadied her rifle, and ran. The village had become a killing ground. Sergeant Drennan pressed his back against the mud wall as rounds chewed through the structure above his head. Dust and debris rained down with each impact. He had lost visual on half his squad in the first 30 seconds of the ambush. The radio was nothing but static. The vehicle was burning, and the enemy had them zeroed from positions he could not even see. "Wick," he shouted. "Wick, give me a sitrep." No response. He risked a glance around the corner and saw Wick huddled behind an overturned cart, his rifle clutched to his chest, his eyes wide and empty. The swagger was gone. The jokes were gone. What remained was a terrified young man who had never seen combat like this. "Wick, Wick, I need you to move to the eastern doorway. We have to consolidate." Wick did not move, did not respond, just stared at nothing while the world burned around him. Drennan cursed and scanned for his other Marines. He counted 7 visible, all pinned in separate positions, all returning fire at enemies they could barely identify. The ridgelines flickered with muzzle flashes, dozens of them, More fighters than intel had suggested existed in the entire province. "We're going to die here," he thought. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had led his squad into a trap, and now they were going to die because he had not listened. Corporal Hadid was 30 meters away, crouched behind what remained of the communications vehicle. Blood soaked his left sleeve, but he was still working, still trying to get a signal out. Drennan watched him swap frequencies, adjust antennas, bang the equipment with his palm in frustration. "Hadid," Drennan called out. "Can you reach anyone?" "Negative. They are jamming everything. I cannot even get the emergency beacon to transmit." An RPG streaked overhead and detonated against a building behind them. The shock wave knocked Drennan sideways, his ears ringing, his vision swimming. When he looked up, he saw Castellanos. The kid had made it to a doorway, just like Tinley had told him, but now he was frozen there. A fighter on the eastern ridge had him zeroed, rounds impacting the wall inches from his head. Castellanos was not returning fire, was not moving, was not doing anything except waiting to die. "Castellanos," Drennan screamed. "Get down. Get inside." The kid did not hear him, or could not process the command. The next burst would find him. Drennan knew it with absolute certainty. He was about to watch a 19-year-old Marine die because he had walked them all into an ambush. Then the fighter on the ridge jerked backward and tumbled from his position. No sound, no warning. One moment he was firing, the next he was falling. Drennan blinked, certain he had imagined it. Another fighter dropped on the western ridge, then another on the east. Clean shots, impossibly precise, coming from somewhere Drennan could not identify. The enemy fire began to slacken as shooters abandoned their positions, suddenly aware that something was hunting them. "What the hell?" Wick whispered, finally snapping out of his paralysis. Who was doing that? Drennan had no answer. He scanned the terrain, looking for friendly forces, looking for the QRF, looking for anything that explained what was happening. There was nothing, just the distant crack of a rifle that did not match any weapon in their squad. Another enemy fell, then two more in quick succession. The western ridge was going quiet, fighters breaking cover and retreating toward the mountain passes. The ambush was falling apart, and Drennan had no idea why. "Hadid," he shouted. "Are you seeing this?" Hadid looked up from his radio, blood dripping from his fingers. "Someone is engaging from elevation. Long-range precision fire. I count 6 tangos down in the last 90 seconds. Who? QRF is not even spun up yet. I do not know. But whoever it is, they're the only reason we are still breathing." The enemy fire had dropped by half. Marines who had been pinned were now able to move, consolidating positions, treating the wounded. The tide was turning impossibly, inexplicably, and Drennan could not understand it. He grabbed his binoculars and scanned the terrain east of their position. Nothing. He swept north. Nothing. Then he caught movement to the southeast, near the abandoned compound that overlooked the valley. A single figure prone on the roof, working a bolt-action rifle with mechanical precision. He adjusted the focus and felt his stomach drop. Lance Corporal Okonkwo lay stretched across the compound roof, her eye pressed to the scope of her M40. As he watched, she tracked a target, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. A fighter on the ridge crumpled. She was not at her assigned position. She was not safe in the tower at the FOB. She had moved, crossing open ground under fire, to a position where she could cover them, to a position where she could do what no one else could. Another shot. Another enemy down. Hadid crawled to Drennan's position, pressing a bandage against his wound. "What is it? What do you see?" Drennan lowered the binoculars. His throat was tight. His eyes burned with something he did not want to name. "It is the roof attachment," he said quietly. "She came for us." Hadid stared at him for a long moment. Then he closed his eyes and let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. On the distant rooftop, Tinley Okonkwo continued to fire. One shot, one kill, over and over. She was single-handedly dismantling an ambush that should have killed them all. But Drennan could see something else through his binoculars. The enemy was not just retreating. Some of them were repositioning, converging. They had identified where the precision fire was coming from. They were going after her. The roof attachment who had saved them was about to become the primary target, and there was nothing Drennan could do but watch. Tinley worked the bolt of her rifle and found her next target. A fighter repositioning on the western ridge, moving toward a machine gun nest that would give him a clear line on the pinned Marines. She led him by 2 feet, accounted for the crosswind, and squeezed. He dropped before he reached the weapon. 17, she counted. 17 confirmed. The compound roof was hard beneath her elbows, the concrete still holding the cold of the previous night. She had reached this position with seconds to spare, scrambling up a collapsed wall just as the first shots echoed across the valley. Now she was the only thing standing between her squad and annihilation. Her father would have understood. He would have made the same choice. The memory surfaced unbidden, as clear as if she were living it again. November 2004. Fallujah. Her mother had received the letter 3 weeks after the funeral, handwritten by a corporal who had been there. Staff Sergeant Okonkwo was on the roof when they hit us. We were in the market, buying supplies, thinking we were safe. Then the whole world went sideways. RPGs, small arms, coming from everywhere. We were pinned in a crossfire with no way out. Your husband saw the flanking element before anyone else. He should have stayed in position. Protocol said stay in position, but he knew if he did not move, we were all dead. He came down from that roof like something out of a movie, drew their fire, called out positions, kept shooting even when they hit him the first time, and the second, and the third. By the time we extracted, he had taken 11 rounds. He was still talking, still giving orders, still trying to protect us. The 12th round came when he was covering our last man out. He saved 12 Marines that day. I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know he did not die hiding. He died fighting for us. He died being exactly who he always was. Tinley blinked the memory away and found her next target. A spotter on the eastern ridge, directing fire for the remaining fighters. She adjusted for elevation and put a round through his chest. 18. The enemy was adapting. She could see it in their movements. The initial confusion had given way to something more dangerous. They were no longer focused solely on the Marines in the village. They were looking for her. A burst of static crackled in her earpiece. Then Hadid's voice, broken but audible. Overwatch, this is Bravo comms. Do you copy? Repeat, do you copy? The jamming was failing. Either the enemy equipment had been damaged, or they had shifted frequencies. Either way, she had a window. Bravo comms, this is Overwatch. I copy. I have eyes on the entire valley. Enemy strength is diminished but reorganizing. I count approximately 14 remaining fighters, 8 on the western ridge, 6 on the eastern approach. A pause. Then Drennan's voice, stripped of its usual arrogance. Overwatch, what is your position? Abandoned compound, grid reference 427. Elevated position with sight lines on both ridges. Another pause, longer this time. Then, softer than she had ever heard him speak, Drennan said, Okonkwo, you crossed open ground to reach that position. Under fire. Alone. Affirmative. Why? Because you needed me, she said simply. And I was the only one who could help. Silence on the radio. She imagined Drennan processing that, reconciling the woman he had dismissed for 9 months with a woman who had just saved his entire squad. The moment of connection passed. There was still work to do. Bravo Actual, listen carefully. I have been tracking enemy movement patterns for 3 weeks. I know how they operate. The fighters on the western ridge will attempt to flank south through the dry riverbed. That is their standard withdrawal route. If you position a fire team at grid reference Feroninine, you can cut off their retreat. How do you know this? Because I watched them do it 4 times during the last month. I documented every patrol, every probe, every movement. I try to tell you, Sergeant. I try to warn you. The words hung in the air. She did not say them with anger. Just exhaustion. Just the weight of being right when no one would listen. Drennan's response was quiet. I know you did. He paused. Fire team moving to Feroninine. What else? She gave him everything. Every piece of intelligence she had gathered. Every pattern she had identified. every weakness in the enemy's approach. Drennan followed her guidance without question, positioning his Marines based on her observations, trusting her in a way he never had before. The tide of battle shifted. The remaining fighters found themselves outmaneuvered, their escape routes blocked, their positions exposed. One by one, they fell back toward the mountains, leaving their dead behind. Tinley allowed herself a single breath of relief. Then she saw the movement. 3 fighters, working their way through the rocks below her position. They had identified her location. They were coming for her. She shifted her rifle and dropped the lead man. The other 2 scattered, finding cover, returning fire. Rounds cracked against the concrete around her, forcing her to flatten against the roof. Bravo Actual, I have enemy contact at my position. 3 tangos, now 2. They're attempting to flank. Can you hold? She checked her ammunition. 4 rounds remaining in the magazine. 1 spare mag in her vest. The fighters below were working in coordination, one providing suppressive fire while the other advanced. I can hold, she said, but not forever. More movement on the ridge. Reinforcements. At least 5 more fighters breaking off from the retreat, converging on a compound. They had decided she was the greater threat. They were going to overwhelm her position with numbers. Bravo Actual, be advised. I have additional contacts inbound. 7 to 8 fighters converging on my position from multiple directions. Drennan's voice was sharp with something she had never heard from him before. Fear. Okonkwo, can you withdraw? She looked at the open ground between her position and any form of safety. The enemy would cut her down before she made it 20 meters. Negative. I am fixed in place. The radio went silent. Tinley pressed her cheek to the stock of her rifle and found her next target. She thought about her father, alone on a roof in Fallujah, making the same calculation she was making now. He had given everything to bring his Marines home. She was prepared to do the same. But unlike her father, she was not ready to die. Not yet. Not until every one of them was safe. She squeezed the trigger and watched another enemy fall. 19. Tinley pressed herself flat against the rooftop as rounds stitched across the concrete inches from her head. Chips of stone sprayed her face, drawing blood from a cut above her eye. She wiped it away and rolled to a new position, acquiring a target through her scope. 20. The fighters were coordinating now, using fire and movement to close the distance. 2 would suppress while a 3rd advanced. Professional. Disciplined. These were not local insurgents. These were trained soldiers, and they wanted her dead. She dropped another one as he broke cover, then immediately shifted to engage the suppressing element. Her bolt cycled. The rifle kicked. A man screamed and fell. 21. 3 rounds left in her magazine. 1 spare. Maybe 40 seconds before they reached the compound walls. After that, it would be close quarters, and her rifle would become a liability. She thought about the pistol on her hip, about the knife strapped to her boot, about all the ways this could end. Not yet, she whispered. Not until they are safe. In the village below, Drennan gathered what remained of his squad. 7 Marines still combat effective. 3 wounded, including Hadid, who refused to stop working the radio despite the blood soaking through his bandage. The enemy had pulled back, retreating toward the mountains, but they all knew why. The enemy was not retreating. They were consolidating. Every fighter who could still hold a weapon was converging on the compound where Okonkwo was making her stand. We have to move, Drennan said. Extraction birds are inbound, but they cannot land until the LZ is secure. Okonkwo is the only thing keeping those ridgelines clear. Wick stepped forward. His face was pale, his hands still trembling, but something had changed in his eyes. Sergeant, we have to go back for Roof. Drennan looked at him. 3 hours ago, Wick had been mocking the Roof attachment. Now he was volunteering to cross open ground under fire to save her. She is 1 Marine, someone said. We have wounded. We should secure the LZ and wait for extract. Wick turned on him. She is 1 Marine who just saved all of our lives. Every single one of us would be dead right now if she had stayed in her tower like she was supposed to. She broke protocol for us. She's going to die for us if we do not move. The squad fell silent. Drennan looked at each of them in turn. Wounded men. Exhausted men. Men who had walked into an ambush and survived only because a woman they had ignored for 9 months had refused to let them die. "We go," he said. "Fire team formation. Hadid, you stay with the wounded and guide the birds in when they arrive. Everyone else on me." They moved out through the village, using the buildings for cover, working toward the compound where Tinley was fighting for her life. The sound of gunfire intensified as they approached. Single shots from a rifle. Bursts of automatic fire in response. She was still alive, still fighting. Tinley heard them before she saw them. Footsteps on the stairs inside the compound. They had breached the lower level. She had seconds before they reached the roof. She fired her last round from the magazine and dropped a fighter on the eastern approach. 22. Then she ejected the empty mag and slammed at her last one. 5 rounds. 5 chances to survive long enough for something to change. A head appeared at the rooftop access point. She fired from the hip and sent the man tumbling back down the stairs. 23. 4 rounds left. Another fighter came through a hole in the wall she had not seen. She pivoted and fired twice. 1 round went wide. The other found his throat. 24. 2 rounds. Movement to her left. She spun, finger on the trigger, and saw Castellanos. The kid had climbed the exterior wall of the compound, somehow finding handholds in the crumbling stone. He pulled himself over the edge and immediately opened fire on a fighter who had been flanking her position. The man dropped. "Castellanos," she shouted. "What are you doing here?" "You said find cover and wait," he yelled back, reloading his rifle. "You said you'd be watching." "Well, now I'm watching you." A burst of fire forced them both down. Tinley saw the shooter, a man with an RPG balanced on his shoulder, preparing to turn the rooftop into a crater. She had one chance. One shot at this range with a bolt-action rifle against a moving target. She did not hesitate. The round took him in the chest before he could fire. The RPG fell from his hands and clattered harmlessly down the rocks. 25. 1 round left. Castellanos crawled to her position, his young face streaked with dirt and fear and something that looked like awe. "Lance Corporal, I have never seen anyone shoot like that. How many have you taken out?" 25 confirmed, she said. "But we are not done yet." More gunfire from below. American weapons this time. Drennan's voice cutting through the chaos, shouting orders, coordinating fire. The rescue team had arrived. The remaining fighters found themselves caught between Tinley's position above and Drennan's team below. The fight was brutal but brief. One by one, the enemy fell or fled until the compound went quiet. Tinley lay on the rooftop, her rifle empty, her body shaking with exhaustion. Castellanos sat beside her, guarding her with his weapon raised, refusing to leave her side. Drennan's head appeared at the roof access. His eyes found Tinley, and for a long moment he just stared. Then he crossed the distance and knelt beside her. "Okonkwo," he said. His voice cracked on her name. She looked up at him. "Did they make it? The wounded?" Hadid guided the birds in. "Everyone is accounted for." He paused. "Because of you. Everyone is alive because of you." The distant thrum of helicopter rotors filled the air. The extraction birds were approaching, finally able to land now that the ridge lines were clear. Now that the roof attachment had done what no one believed she could. Drennan extended his hand. "Can you walk?" Tinley took his hand and let him pull her upright. Her legs were unsteady. Her vision swam, but she was alive. They all were. Castellanos stayed close as they descended to the ground. The kid had not stopped shaking, but he had not stopped protecting her either. "You came back for me," she said to him quietly. He nodded. "You told me the people who help are not always the ones making noise. I figured it was time to stop making noise and start helping." She put her hand on his shoulder. The first genuine human contact she had felt in months. "You did good," she said. "You're going to be okay." The helicopters touched down in a storm of dust and noise. Marines loaded wounded onto stretchers. Drennan shouted coordinates into a radio that finally worked. And Tinley Okonkwo walked toward extraction on her own 2 feet. Her father had given his life on a roof in Fallujah. She had almost given hers on a roof in Helmand. But she was going home. and she was taking all of them with her. The helicopter rotors beat the air into submission as the first bird touched down in the village square. Dust swirled in cyclones, obscuring everything beyond arm's reach. Tenley moved through the chaos on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, Castellanos at her side, Drennan clearing a path ahead. They were 50 meters from extraction when the shooting started again. Contact left, someone screamed. Contact left, ridgeline. The enemy had regrouped faster than anyone anticipated. Muzzle flashes erupted from the rocks above the village, rounds snapping through the air, kicking up dirt around the landing zone. One of the helicopters lurched sideways as a bullet punched through its fuselage. Tenley dropped to a knee and raised her rifle before remembering it was empty. She reached for her pistol instead, drawing the M9 from her thigh holster. Not enough range. Not enough stopping power. But it was something. Okonkwo, Drennan shouted over the roar of the rotors. Get to the bird. Now. She shook her head. Not until everyone else is on. A round cracked past her ear, close enough that she felt the heat of its passage. She returned fire with the pistol, knowing she was outranged, knowing it was futile, but refusing to stop. Then she felt it. A hammer blow to her left side, just below her vest. The impact spun her sideways, and she hit the ground hard, the breath driven from her lungs. For a moment, everything went silent. The helicopters, the gunfire, the shouting. All of it faded into a high-pitched whine that filled her skull. She looked down and saw blood spreading across her uniform, dark and wet against the desert tan. Okonkwo is hit, someone yelled. Okonkwo is down. Hands grab her, lifting her from the dirt. She tried to push them away, tried to stand on her own, but her legs would not cooperate. The faces above her swam in and out of focus. Drennan. Wick. A medic she did not recognize. Stay with me, Drennan said. His voice was distant, muffled. Tenley, stay with me. She tried to respond, but no words came. The world was tilting, sliding sideways, and she could not find her balance. The medic pressed something against her wound, and the pain cut through the fog like a blade. She gasped, her back arching, her hands clawing at the ground. Through, the medic reported. Round went through. Missed the major vessels, but she is losing blood fast. We need to move. They carried her toward the helicopter, shielding her body with their own. Rounds continued to impact around them, but the fire was less coordinated now. Hadid had somehow gotten the QRF on the radio, and gunships were inbound. They just needed to hold for a few more minutes. The helicopter bay was cramped with wounded Marines. Tenley found herself pressed against the bulkhead, the medic working on her side while the bird's crew chief returned fire with a mounted gun. The noise was deafening. The vibration shook her bones. Drennan crouched beside her, his face inches from hers. His eyes were wet. She had never seen him look like that before. You came back for the roof attachment, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. He shook his head. We came back for Tenley Okonkwo. He gripped her hand. And you're going to make it. You hear me? You're going to make it because I'm not explaining to anyone how I got the best Marine in this squad killed. She tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. Blood flecked her lips. The medic cursed and applied more pressure. Through the helicopter's open door, she could see the village receding, the compound where she had made her stand shrinking into the distance. The ridgelines still flickered with gunfire, but it was scattered now, desperate. The ambush had failed. The trap had been sprung, and somehow, impossibly, they had survived. Hadid's voice crackled over the radio, audible even above the rotor noise. All Bravo elements, be advised. Gunships on station. Enemy positions are being neutralized. LZ is secure for remaining extract. The second helicopter lifted off behind them, carrying the last of the squad. Everyone accounted for. Everyone going home. Tenley closed her eyes. The pain in her side had faded to a dull throb, which the medic said was a bad sign, but she was too tired to care. She thought about her father, about the rooftop in Fallujah, about the letter her mother had received. He saved 12 Marines that day. She had lost count somewhere around 25. The number did not matter. What mattered was that the helicopters were flying, and every seat was filled with someone who would see their family again. Okonkwo, Drennan said. She opened her eyes. He was still there, still holding her hand. Staff Sergeant Rose saw everything from the command post. The drone feed, your movement to the compound, every shot you took. He looked away for a moment, composing himself. He said he has never seen anything like it. None of us have. I was just doing my job, she said. No, you were doing more than your job. You were being exactly who you are. Drennan squeezed her hand. I should have seen it sooner. I should have listened. The helicopter banked toward the FOB, and through the door, Tenley could see the guard tower where she had spent 9 months watching and waiting. The roof attachment position, the place everyone had forgotten. She would never stand in that tower again. Whatever came next, she knew that much. The roof attachment was gone. What remained was something else entirely. The medic adjusted her fore and checked her vitals. Pulse is stabilizing. She's going to make it. Drennan exhaled. Hear that, Okonkwo? You're going to make it. She nodded weakly. Told you. Not ready to die yet. The FOB appeared on the horizon, growing larger with each passing second. Medical teams waited on the landing pad, stretchers ready, doctors prepared. They had been tracking the engagement from the moment the first shots were fired. They knew what was coming. They knew a hero was coming home. Tenley kept her eyes open, watching the base approach, watching the life she had known transform into something unrecognizable. The pain was still there, but so was something else. Pride, relief, the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept. She had told her father she would bring them home, and she had. The helicopter touched down at FOB Griffin in a storm of dust and controlled chaos. Medical teams swarmed the landing pad before the rotors had even begun to slow, stretchers appearing from every direction, voices shouting vitals and instructions. Tenley felt hands lifting her from the bay, felt the stretcher beneath her back, felt the harsh sunlight on her face as they rushed her toward the field hospital. The world moved in fragments. Fluorescent lights overhead. The smell of antiseptic. Someone cutting away her uniform. Blood pressure dropping, a voice said, "We need to move." She tried to speak, tried to ask about the others, but a mask descended over her face and the world went soft around the edges. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was Staff Sergeant Rowe standing in the doorway of the surgical bay, watching her with an expression she could not read. The surgery took 4 hours. The round had passed through her side, nicking her liver and cracking 2 ribs before exiting. The damage was significant but survivable. The surgeons worked with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this too many times, closing vessels, removing fragments, putting her back together piece by piece. When Tenley woke, the sun had set. The field hospital was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and the distant hum of generators. She was in a recovery bay, fur lines trailing from her arm, bandages wrapped tight around her midsection. She was alive. The realization hit her slowly, filtering through the haze of medication. She was alive, and she was in a bed, and the war was still happening somewhere outside these walls, but for this moment, she was safe. She turned her head and found Hadid sitting in a chair beside her bed. His arm was in a sling, his face pale beneath his tan, but he was smiling. "Welcome back," he said. "The others?" "Everyone made it." Hadid leaned forward. 12 Marines walked into that valley. 12 Marines walked out. "Because of you." She closed her eyes. The tears came before she could stop them, sliding down her temples into her hair. She had spent so long preparing to die, like her father, that she had not fully considered what it would mean to live. "Hey," Hadid said softly. "It is okay. You did it, Tenley. You brought them all home." She nodded, unable to speak. The weight of everything she had carried for 9 months, for 20 years, since the day her mother had opened that letter from Fallujah, seemed to lift from her chest. Not completely. Some weights never fully disappear, but enough that she could breathe. The door opened, and Staff Sergeant Rowe entered. He moved with the careful precision of a man who had seen too much and learned to carry it quietly. He dismissed Hadid with a nod and pulled the chair closer to Tenley's bed. "Lance Corporal Okonkwo," he said, "how are you feeling?" "Like I got shot, sir." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. I have been reviewing the drone footage from today's engagement. I have also been reading your journal. Sergeant Drennan gave it to me. Tenley felt a flash of something. Embarrassment, maybe vulnerability. That journal contained everything. Every observation, every frustration, every moment of being ignored. Sir, I can explain. You do not need to explain anything. Rowe held up the worn leather notebook. This is the most comprehensive intelligence document I have seen from a Lance Corporal in 30 years of service. You identified the ambush 3 weeks before it happened. You tracked enemy movement patterns with more accuracy than our dedicated intel assets. You tried to warn your chain of command, and you were ignored. He set the journal on her bedside table. Then, when the ambush occurred, you abandoned your safe position, crossed open ground under fire, and single-handedly engaged and neutralized 25 enemy combatants. You provided tactical guidance that allowed your squad to maneuver effectively. You held a position against overwhelming odds until rescue arrived, and you took a bullet ensuring every member of your team made it to extraction. He paused, letting the words settle. Lance Corporal, I have seen a lot of Marines in my career. I have never seen anything like what you did today. Tenley did not know what to say. The praise felt foreign, like a language she had never learned to speak. I was just doing my job, sir. The Overwatch position. That is what it is for. Rowe shook his head. What you did goes far beyond any job description. You demonstrated initiative, judgment, and combat effectiveness that would be exceptional in a senior NCO. In a Lance Corporal, it is extraordinary. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. A rifle scope, old and worn, with scratches along the housing and tape holding the adjustment knobs in place. Tenley's breath caught. Her father's scope. She had left it on the compound rooftop when they evacuated. She thought it was gone forever. One of the rescue team found it, Rose said. They said it was sitting next to your firing position, right where you could reach it. You placed it in her hands. She clutched it to her chest, feeling the familiar weight, the worn metal that still held traces of her father's grip. Your father was Staff Sergeant Emeka Okonkwo, Rowe continued. Fallujah, 2004. I read the citation for his Silver Star. You knew him? I knew of him. Every Marine who served in that era knew the story. The Overwatch who came down from the roof. The man who saved 12 lives. Rowe's voice softened. I did not know he had a daughter. I did not know she was serving under my command. But I know now. He stood, straightening his uniform. Get some rest, Lance Corporal. When you are recovered, we have a lot to discuss. Starting with why the roof attachment position has been criminally undervalued and what we are going to do about it. He walked to the door, then paused. Your father would be proud of you, Tenley. I hope you know that. Then he was gone, and Tenley was alone with the scope in her hands and the beeping of machines and the quiet knowledge that everything had changed. She pressed the scope to her lips, feeling the cold metal against her skin. I kept my promise, Dad, she whispered. I brought them all home. Outside, the stars were emerging over the mountains of Helmand Province. The same stars her father had seen in Fallujah. The same stars that had watched over every Marine who had ever stood on a rooftop and kept their brothers and sisters safe. She was one of them now, not just a roof attachment, a guardian. 3 days passed in a haze of medication and dreamless sleep. Tenley's body was healing. The surgeon said, faster than they expected. The liver was mending. The ribs would take longer, but she was young and strong and had apparently inherited her father's stubborn refusal to stay down. On the 4th day, she woke to find flowers on her bedside table. Not real flowers, paper ones, folded from MRE wrappers and instruction manuals, arranged in an empty water bottle. A card sat beside them, signed by every member of Bravo Squad. Get well soon, Roof. We need our guardian angel back. She traced her fingers over the signatures. Hadid's neat script, Castellanos' shaky handwriting, Wick's surprisingly careful letters. And at the bottom, in a hand she recognized from 9 months of reading patrol reports, a single line from Drennan. I owe you more than I can ever repay. The visitors came throughout the day. Marines she barely knew stopped by to shake her hand and tell her they had heard what happened. The story had spread through the FOB like wildfire. The The roof attachment who had single-handedly broken an ambush. The lance corporal who had saved an entire squad. Details grew with each retelling, but for once, the exaggerations fell short of the truth. Castellanos came in the afternoon, his arm in a sling from a graze he had taken during the rescue. He stood at the foot of her bed, looking younger than his 19 years, struggling to find words. "I want to say thank you," he finally managed. "You saved my life. More than once." Tenley smiled. "You came back for me on that rooftop. That took courage, Castellanos. More courage than most people have. I just did what you taught me. Find cover. Stay alert. Watch out for each other." He paused. "My mom wants to write you a letter. I told her about you. About everything you did. She cried for an hour. Tell her I would be honored." He nodded, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn phone card. "This is the one you gave me. Before the mission. I want you to have it back." "Keep it," she said. "Call your mom again. Tell her you're coming home." The tears that welled in his eyes said more than any words could. He snapped a salute, the crispest salute she had ever seen from a private first class, and walked out before he lost his composure entirely. What came next? He stood in the doorway for a long moment, as if unsure whether he would be welcome. The swagger was gone. The jokes were gone. What remained was a man confronting something he did not know how to face. "Can I come in?" She nodded. He pulled a chair to her bedside and sat heavily, his hands clasped between his knees. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick with everything that needed to be said. "I was wrong," Wick finally said. "About you. About the Overwatch position. About everything." He looked up at her, and she saw something she had never expected to see in his eyes. "Shame. I made jokes about you for 9 months. I called you spare parts. I said you were not a real Marine. I remember." He flinched. "I almost got us all killed because I did not listen. Because I thought I knew better than some lance corporal sitting on a roof. And when things went sideways, you saved my life. You saved all of us." He shook his head. "I do not know how to make that right." Tenley considered him for a moment. The man who had mocked her. The man who had called her a babysitter. The man who had frozen in terror when the bullets started flying. "You already did," she said, "when you stood up and said we have to go back for Roof. When you chose to come for me instead of waiting for extract. That was the real you, Wick. The man who steps up when it matters." She reached out and touched his arm. "We are good. I mean it." He exhaled, a long shuddering breath, and nodded. Then he stood, snapped a salute, and walked out without another word. Drennan arrived as the sun was setting, painting the walls of the hospital bay in shades of amber and gold. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, days of stubble on his jaw, the weight of command pressing down on his shoulders in ways it never had before. He did not sit. He stood at the foot of her bed, hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man preparing to give a report. "I have been going over the after-action analysis," he said. "The enemy force we encountered was nearly 40 fighters. Trained, equipped, positioned specifically to annihilate our squad." She nodded. "I counted at least 30 during my observation. The analysts confirmed your journals were accurate. Every pattern you identified, every position you mapped. You saw it all before anyone else did." He paused. "If you had not moved to that compound, if you had stayed in your assigned position, we would all be dead. There is no other assessment. Total loss. I did what needed to be done. You did more than that." Drennan's voice cracked slightly. "You eliminated 27 confirmed enemy combatants. 27. That is more than some entire platoons achieve in a full deployment. And you did it alone, from a position you reached by crossing 300 meters of open ground under fire. 27. The number settled into her chest, heavier than she expected. 27 men who would never go home because of her rifle. 27 families who would grieve. She did not regret it. She could not regret it, but she would carry it. "I should have listened to you," Drennan continued. "From the beginning. You tried to warn me about the ambush. You tried to share your intelligence. And I dismissed you because I thought I knew better. Because I saw the roof attachment instead of the Marine." He stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers. "I am sorry, Tenley. Not just for this mission. For every time I ignored you. For every time I let someone mock your position. For every time I failed to see what you were capable of. I was wrong, and I will spend the rest of my career trying to be better because of you. She held his gaze. Apology accepted, Sergeant. He nodded once, sharply, then turned toward the door. He was almost out when she called after him. Drennan. He stopped. Thank you for coming back for me. He looked over his shoulder. We would come back for you 1,000 times, Okonkwo. Every single one of us. Then he was gone, and Tinley was alone with the paper flowers and the setting sun and the knowledge that everything she had endured had been worth it. The door opened again 5 minutes later. Staff Sergeant Rowe entered, and he was not alone. Behind him came a colonel she did not recognize, wearing the insignia of the regiment's commanding officer. In Rowe's hands was a folder. Official documents. The kind that changed careers. Lance Corporal Okonkwo, Rowe said. I believe you have met Colonel Hargrove. The colonel stepped forward, his expression unreadable. I have been reviewing your case, Lance Corporal, and I have some things I would like to discuss with you. Colonel Hargrove had a face carved from decades of service. Deep lines around his eyes, silver at his temples. The kind of stillness that came from having seen everything the military could show a man and choosing to keep serving anyway. He pulled a chair beside her bed while Rowe remained standing near the door. The folder in his hands bore official stamps and classification markings that made Tinley's stomach tighten. Lance Corporal Okonkwo, the colonel began. I have spent the last 72 hours reviewing every piece of documentation related to your actions during the engagement at Objective Griffin. Drone footage, radio transcripts, after-action reports, witness statements from every member of your squad. He opened the folder and spread several documents across his lap. 27 confirmed enemy kills in a single engagement. Tactical guidance that enabled your squad to maneuver out of a prepared kill zone. Individual actions that directly prevented the deaths of 12 United States Marines. He looked up at her. Do you understand what that means? Sir, I was just doing my job. No, Lance Corporal. You were not. Hargrove's voice carried an edge that was not anger, but intensity. Your job was to provide overwatch from a fixed position at FOB Griffin. What you did was recognize a developing threat, attempt to warn your chain of command, and when that warning was ignored, take independent action that violated direct orders and standard protocol. Tinley felt her chest tighten. Was she being reprimanded? Court-martialed? She had broken protocol. She had left her assigned position without authorization. Hargrove let the silence stretch for a moment, then continued. In other words, you demonstrated exactly the kind of initiative, judgment, and moral courage that defines the finest Marines in the history of this Corps. The breath she had been holding escaped in a rush. Staff Sergeant Rowe has submitted a recommendation for the Navy Cross, Hargrove said. I have reviewed and endorsed that recommendation. It will be forwarded to the Commandant's office for final approval. The Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in the Marine Corps. Tinley felt the words without quite processing them, as if they belonged to someone else's story. Sir, she managed. I do not know what to say. You do not need to say anything. Hargrove closed the folder. But there is something else, something that matters more to me than any medal. He nodded to Rowe, who stepped forward. Lance Corporal, Rowe said, I have been in communication with Marine Corps Training Command. The designation of the Overwatch position has been under review for several years. Your case has provided the final evidence needed to formalize a change in doctrine. He handed her a document, official letterhead, dense paragraphs of military language. But one phrase stood out, circled in red ink. Designated marksman and Overwatch specialist. Effective immediately, Rowe continued. The position formerly known as roof attachment will be redesignated as Overwatch specialist. The role will be recognized as a critical tactical asset requiring advanced training and appropriate rank consideration. The dismissive terminology will be removed from all official documentation and training materials. Tinley stared at the document. All those months of being overlooked. All those jokes about being a spare part. All those times she had been forgotten in briefings and ignored in debriefs. No one would ever call a Marine in her position just the roof attachment again. This is because of you, Rowe said. Your journals, your observations, your actions. You proved what that position can mean when it is taken seriously and staffed by someone with your capabilities. She did not trust herself to speak. The tears were coming again, and she let them. Hargrove stood, straightening his uniform. There is a ceremony scheduled for next week. You will be recognized formally in front of the regiment. Your squad has requested to be present. He paused at the door. Your father was Staff Sergeant Emeka Okonkwo. Silver Star. Fallujah. Yes, sir. The colonel nodded slowly. I served with men who knew him. They still tell his story. The Overwatch who came down from the roof. He looked at her with something that might have been respect or might have been wonder. Now, they will tell your story too. The daughter who finished what her father started. Then he was gone, and Tinley was alone with Ro and the weight of everything that had just happened. Ro handed her an envelope. This arrived this morning. From your mother. Tinley took it with trembling hands. The handwriting on the front was familiar. Graceful loops and careful letters. Her mother's script, unchanged since childhood. She opened the envelope and withdrew a single page. My dearest Tinley, the letter began. Staff Sergeant Ro called me yesterday. He told me what you did. He told me everything. I have spent 20 years carrying the weight of your father's death, wondering if he would be remembered, wondering if his sacrifice meant anything beyond a medal in a drawer and a flag on a shelf. Now I know. It meant you. You were his legacy, Tinley. Everything he was, everything he believed in, everything he gave his life for. It lives on in you. I always knew you would make him proud. I just did not know how much. Come home safe, my daughter. Come home and tell me everything. I have waited so long to hear your stories. Your father is not forgotten. He never was, because you remember him with every breath you take and every life you save. Oh, my love, always. Mom. Tinley pressed the letter to her chest and wept. Not from sadness, not from grief, but from something she had not felt in 20 years. Peace. Her father had saved 12 Marines and given his life doing it. She had saved 12 Marines and lived to tell the story. His legacy was not a faded photograph or a medal in a case. His legacy was standing guard on every rooftop where a Marine kept watch. His legacy was the new doctrine that would honor that position. His legacy was his daughter, wounded but alive, ready to carry his memory forward. Ro placed a hand on her shoulder. The ceremony is in 7 days, Lance Corporal. Can you be ready? She wiped her eyes and looked up at him. I have been ready my whole life, sir. She just had not known it until now. The ceremony took place on a clear morning at FOB Griffin, with the mountains standing watch in the distance and the flag snapping crisp in the wind. 200 Marines stood in formation on the parade ground. Officers in dress uniforms. Enlisted men and women in their cleanest utilities. Every member of Bravo Squad in the front row, standing at attention with the kind of precision usually reserved for generals. Tinley walked to the platform under her own power, though her side still ached with every step. The bandages were hidden beneath her uniform, but the wound was a reminder she would carry for the rest of her life. A small prize for what she had gained. Colonel Hargrove stood at the podium, the Navy Cross gleaming in its presentation case beside him. Behind him, Staff Sergeant Ro and Sergeant Drennan waited with the formal stillness of men about to witness history. Ladies and gentlemen, Hargrove began, his voice carrying across the silent formation. We are gathered here to recognize extraordinary valor in the face of overwhelming odds, to honor a Marine who embodies everything this Corps stands for, and to acknowledge that sometimes the heroes we need most are the ones we fail to see. He turned to Tinley. Lance Corporal Tinley Okonkwo distinguished herself through exceptional courage and tactical brilliance during the engagement at Objective Griffin. When her squad walked into a prepared ambush, she abandoned the safety of her assigned position, crossed 300 meters of open ground under enemy fire, and established a firing position that allowed her to engage and neutralize 27 enemy combatants. Her actions directly saved the lives of 12 United States Marines. He lifted the Navy Cross from its case. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action, Lance Corporal Okonkwo is awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in the United States Marine Corps. He pinned the medal to her chest. The weight of it was slight, but it carried the memory of every shot she had fired, every life she had saved, every moment of being invisible that had led to this. The formation erupted in applause. Not the polite applause of protocol, but the thunderous approval of Marines who understood what she had done. Tinley stood at attention, her eyes fixed forward, her heart pounding against her ribs. When the applause faded, Hargrove stepped aside. Sergeant Drennan took his place at the podium. He looked out the formation, then at Tinley, and took a breath. 9 months ago, I was assigned a new Overwatch specialist. I called her the Roof Attachment. I ignored her intelligence. I dismissed her warnings. I let my squad mock her position because I did not understand what it meant. His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. Lance Corporal Okonkwo tried to tell me we were walking into an ambush. I did not listen. When the bullets started flying, she did not say, "I told you so." She did not stay safe in her tower. She came for us. She risked everything to save Marines who had never given her the respect she deserved. He turned to face her directly. I learned something that day. The roof is not an attachment. It is the guardian. The person who sees what no one else sees. The person who stands watch while everyone else sleeps. And Tinley Okonkwo is the finest guardian I have ever known. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small patch. Embroidered on it was a single word. Guardian. From this day forward, he said, this is your call sign. Not roof. Not the attachment. Guardian. Because that is what you are to every Marine who serves beside you. Tinley took the patch with hands that trembled slightly. The words seemed to glow against the dark fabric. A new name. A new identity. A new beginning. The formation applauded again. Castellanos was wiping his eyes. Wick was grinning through tears he would later deny. Hadid stood tall, his wounded arm still in a sling, pride radiating from every line of his face. Tinley looked out at them. Her squad, her family, the people she had saved and who had saved her in return. She had spent her whole life trying to honor her father's memory, trying to prove that the roof was not just a forgotten position for forgotten Marines. Trying to be seen. Now she understood. Being seen was not about recognition or medals or ceremonies. It was about the people who stood beside you when the world was falling apart. It was about the bonds forged in fire that nothing could break. She was seen. She had always been seen by the people who mattered. 6 months later, a young private first class named Joaquin Delgado climbed the ladder to the Overwatch position at FOB Griffin. He was 19 years old, fresh from training, and deeply uncertain about his assignment. The position had a reputation now. Every Marine on base knew the story of what had happened here. The ambush, the rescue, the Lance Corporal who had single-handedly turned the tide. Delgado settled into position and looked out at the valley. The same mountains, the same goat paths, the same shadows that held secrets only patience could reveal. An older Marine climbed up behind him, a corporal with 3 deployments and eyes that had seen too much. First day on Overwatch? Yes, Corporal. The older Marine sat beside him and followed his gaze across the terrain. Let me tell you about the Marine who had this position before you. She was not much older than you when she started. Quiet, kept to herself. Spent 9 months watching this valley while everyone else kicked indoors and told war stories. Delgado listened. They called her the Roof Attachment, like she was a spare part, something you bolt on and forget about. She tried to warn them about an ambush, and nobody listened. When her squad walked into a kill zone, she crossed open ground under fire to save them. Took out 27 enemy fighters by herself. Took a bullet getting her people home. The corporal pointed to a compound in the distance. She made her stand right there, alone, outnumbered, refusing to quit until every Marine was safe. He looked at Delgado. She was not just the Roof Attachment. She was the one who brought them all home. Delgado stared at the compound, imagining the battle that had raged there. The courage it must have taken. What happened to her? She is stateside now, training the next generation of Overwatch specialists at Quantico. The corporal smiled. They say she is the toughest instructor they have ever had. And the best. 3,000 miles away, Tinley Okonkwo stood on a training tower overlooking the Virginia hills. Below her, A class of young Marines practiced the skills she had learned through blood and fire. Patience, observation, the ability to see what others missed. On the wall of her office, her father's scope rested in a display case beside her Navy Cross and the Guardian patch Drennan had given her. 3 objects that told the story of 2 generations. 2 Marines. 1 legacy. She watched her students through binoculars, noting their positions, their sight lines, their mistakes. Tomorrow she would teach them to be better. Tonight she would call her mother and tell her about the progress they were making. But for now, in this moment, she simply watched. The same way she had watched over her squad. The same way her father had watched over his. Guardians, all of them. Past and present and future. If this story moved you, drop a comment and share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character. Or tell us about someone you know who served in a role that never got the recognition it deserved. Someone who watched over others without ever asking for thanks. Tinley smiled as the sun set over the hills. She was exactly where she was meant to be, and she would never be invisible again.